Hi and welcome to the Unisky training platform. Do remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel Godfred Yaka for more videos. In today's lecture, we are going to learn how to configure a static route using an interface and an IP address as the next hop. Again, we would verify how a static route operates. Then we would implement interconnection between a local and external network using a default route, and finally we would see how to configure a backup static route on a router. Now this is the scenario we are going to use in our complete tutorial. We assume that you are a network administrator of a company with a single administrative domain, and within the administrative domain multiple networks have been defined for which there is no routing or method of routing on your network. Now it is your job to set up a few network routes within your organization which would be static for intercommunication or for interwork communication on your network. So this is the topology we are going to base our whole tutorial on. We would have router 1, 2 and 3 that belong to the company, where we would be using the unlisted IP addresses, where router 1 connects to router 3 and 2 connects to router 3 and then 1, for which if there is a link failure between any of the routers, one of the links should serve as a backup through, or should serve as a backup route through to the other router. So we would also create loopback interfaces. The loopback interface is a logical interface that allows for border gateway protocols to have neighboring relationship between two routes, maybe, or two routers on a network. So these are the IP addresses I have listed for which we would configure our three routers. Router 1 would have IPs on port 0, port 1, and then we'll create the loopback interface. Then router 2 would have on port 1, port 2 and its loopback interface, and router 3 would have for port 0 and port 1. Now router 2 doesn't have for port 0 because it connects to router 1 via port 1 and then router 3 via port 2. So we wouldn't be using the port 0 on for any activity on router 2. That is why it is not specified here. So if you look at the previous topology I showed you, if you look at this topology, you realize that router 2 does not utilize its port 0. So that is why there is this particular IP address block listed. So now we will be using the ENSP simulator to achieve this particular target. Now we start our paper project, then we choose a name, maybe static routes, and then we choose a place to save it. I choose to save mine here, and okay. So once we have our paper project, the canvas is empty and ready for us to start our work. So we are going to base on this particular topology. So we simply design the topology. We have router 1, router 2, and then router 3, right? So we put router 2 there, then we establish a connection between them. So we come here and then we say from router 1, from our topology we are saying router 1 connects to router 2 via port 1. So on gigabit ether 1 to here, that is router 1 and router 2 connection. Then router 2 connects to router 3 via port 2. So from gigabit ethernet 2 to gigabit ethernet 2 here, and then router 1 connects to router 3 via port 0 to port 0 on this particular interface. So basically we have our topology spelled out, and then we start our devices. So remember, the device needs to be started before you can log onto it. If you don't turn it on, you cannot configure your device. Okay, so our devices are still booting. We give them some time to come up to speed. So remember, to document these particular IP addresses because that is what we'll be using for our configuration. I think router 2 is up now, router 3 is up, and then okay, so all our routers are up. Now we are going to follow this particular setup for our configuration for router 1, router 2, and router 3. So once we have logged onto router 1, let's compare the settings as we set them. So I'm going to maximize this for you to have a good view there. I think this is okay. So now we change our router name, but before we change our router name, we need to switch from the global view to the configuration mode. So we say system-view, which takes us to the configuration mode, and then sysname would be rt-1. So we are in router 1 now. It has changed our router name to rt1. Now that it has accepted our changes, we navigate to port 0 of router 1 and assign this particular IP address to it with the following subnet max 24 bits on our network. So say interface gigabit Ethernet 0/0/0, and then we assign the IP address. So once we are in that particular interface, we assign the IP address. So we say IP address, then we spell it out, which is 10.0.13.1. It is right here, and then we define the subnet mask for it. So 24. So it brings the link state up. That means it has accepted our changes, and then we use kill or quit. So you can either say kill, quit, or Control Z to take you back to the router interface for selection of any other port you want to go to. So now we could also use the up arrow key to return any command we have previously entered. It works like the Linux terminal or the Windows command prompt, or maybe the PowerShell. So I just navigate back there and then I choose 1 rather than typing the whole command again. So I choose port 1. I changed the 0 to 1 because we are navigating to port 1 of the same router. So I hit enter, and then I say IP address for this particular interface will be 10.0.12.1 with a subnet mask of what? 24. So it has accepted it. That is 10.0.12.1 with a subnet mask of what? 24 bits. So now that we are done entering these particular IP addresses, we create the logical interface, which is what? The loopback interface. So it will be loopback 0. We quit, come back to the main interface, and then we say interface loopback 0. So we are within the loopback interface, and then we enter IP address 10. Oops. So I was here 10.0.1.1 subnet max 24. So this brings us to the end of our first router configuration, changing the name to RT-1, and then we've entered these particular IP addresses within the interface. So we can display IP interface brief. So we display to see what we did, to see if the changes have taken effect. So we realize that we have assigned to port 0 10.0.13.1/24. Then this is 10.0.12.1/24, and then there is the loopback interface too, which is up. So we have 3 main interfaces coming up, but you would be wondering why the null 0 interface is up. That is the default console port, which is automatically up, because if you are using the physical device, that port is the default port you would have to connect your serial cable to do your configurations. That is why it is up by default. So if you really know your way around your devices, after doing everything, you can choose to disable this so that you pass through other channels in entering your router. But I recommend you don't disable it. You only put a password on it, and you can learn how to protect your router with passwords on the same YouTube channel. When you visit it, there are more videos on how to enable passwords on your routers. Now we go to the next router here. We do the same configuration to it. So I'm expanding it for you to have a good view. Now we say system view. System-view takes us to the system view of the router. Oops. Okay. Then now we change the name, which is what? Sysname RT-2, because we want it to be what? Router 2. So now we are going to deal with this block of IP addresses here for router 2. Right. So we navigate to interface gigabit port 0/0/1, because we don't have port 0 here enabled, because we want to connect via port 1 to router 1 and then via port 2 to router 3. So this is it. Then we choose the IP address. So we say IP address and we define it, which is 10.0.12.2. And then, oops, we didn't provide the MAC address. So we provide the MAC address and then we hit enter. So in the next IP address I'm going to enter, I'm deliberately going to hit enter again without the MAC address, then we explain a point. So I navigate out of here and then I get back to interface gigabit 0/0/2. Right. So IP address 10.0.23.2. We are supposed to provide the MAC address, but I wouldn't. Now, if you enter, there is a command telling you incomplete command. That means it is an error. So usually, if you don't know the command that follows, you simply use the question mark to get clues from the pool of commands beneath that particular module you are working on. So it is telling us to enter our subnet mask. So we simply enter the subnet mask 24 and then we hit enter. Then we set the loopback interface for this particular router 2. So from the main interface, we say interface loopback 0. Right. So the IP address for this particular interface would be 10.0.2.2 subnet mask of 24. So that brings us to the IP set and the name change of this particular router 2, and then we can simply display our configuration to see. So previously I used display IP interface brief. Now I'm just going to say display this to see the current configuration I did. So it is telling us that we maybe on May 4th we created maybe this particular IP address as a loopback and so on and so forth. So it has given me the pool of settings or the list of settings I made on the router. So we can either use display this or display IP interface brief. The difference is that the display IP interface brief gives us a complete pool or changes we have made within the router that concerns IP addresses and then interfaces. And then the display this reproduces the exact changes we have made on the router, be it an IP, be it a password, a route, a protocol, or any other service we have enabled. So we are on router 3 now. We change it to router 3. We enter the system view. Then we change the name sysname RT-3. So we are going to set the pool of IP addresses to like we did for the other 2 routers. So I say IP. So there is interface gigabit Ethernet 0/0/0 because we are assigning to the first port here 0/0/0, and then IP address So it's 10.0.13.3 with a subnet mask 24. I'm going a bit fast because it is the same thing we did for the previous routers. So I quit. So you can simply slow down the video to go along with me. Now let's navigate to the other interface, which is 1, then IP address 10.0.23.3.24. Now we assign the loopback interface to. So I say interface loopback 0, then IP address 10.0.3.3. Oops, what did we do? A subnet mask of what? 24 has been added to it. So right now we have successfully changed the names of our routers and then the IP addresses to the respective interfaces as we saw in the presentation here. So currently we have this particular topology spelled out within our simulator. Now you would realize that I can easily communicate from router 1 to router 2. Say, let us do a simple ping. So I ping, say 10.0.13.1, and then there is a simple reply because there is that particular connection. But when a link fails, it means I won't be able to get the connection. So we are going to look at how to define or how to configure the static routes on router 2, because router 2 links up router 1 and then router 3. So on router 2, we are going to say IP static. So you use the tab key. Remember, always use the tab key to get your command. So IP route dash static. So it's what? Then now we are going to use the IP address of the router 2 from say 10.0.13.0 with a subnet mask of 24 on 10.0.23.3. So we are going to route from router 2 through to router 3. So we are going to say 10.0.13.0. Now we are using 0 because this is the network ID. So this is the broadcast IP. So you realize that we are not using 10.0.13.1 as we see here. The 1 is the interface IP address, but the 10.0.13.0 is the broadcast IP. So that is the network. So we are assigning the whole network to a particular path. So a subnet mask of this on which particular network, which would be 10.0.23.3. So we are pushing this particular network of router 1 through to router 3. So now that we understand this particular one, we hit enter and then it accepts that particular route. So we are going to again create a route through to the other network. So which would be again IP route static route 10.0.3.0. Remember, we are dealing with the broadcast IP, so that is the network. This is very delicate, so you should be very sure of which network you are assigning, because once you do this, you have succeeded in creating a route path. So when the router wants to communicate with another router via any hub, that is the path it will be using. So once you make a mistake, your router wouldn't know which path to rely on in doing its communication. Then you may tend to resolve errors. So I change this 10.0.23. So I do this. Now once I have this, I want to display my routing table and see what I have within this particular router. So I simply say display IP routing table, then I enter. So what do we see? We realize that, let me maximize this for you to see a view of it a bit. So you see that there is a direct connection here. So port 10.0.2.0 is direct, 10.0.2.2 is direct, but 10.0.3, that particular network we brought from this particular interface. So we have it from here, router 3. This particular interface has been defined statically on router 2. So anytime router 2 wants to communicate, it realizes that there is a static routing pool defined within me where I can rely on. So it is using this particular network to pass through to any other destination or any other place you are asking the information from. So now we see how the routing table goes. Now we are going to configure what is called the backup static route. Now that we know of how to define the static route, we go to router 1. So under router 1, we tell it IP route dash static. Remember to use your tab key. So 10.0.3.0 network of 24 bits to 10.0.13.3. So a static route has been created from router 1 through to router 3. Right. Then again, we say IP route dash static. So now, because we are selecting a backup static route, we need to define a preference. So within the previous router, the default preference is probably 60. So we define another preference to it, which should be a bit higher than the default preference. So we say IP route dash static is 10.0.13.0 255.255.255.0. I'm deliberately using this because you've realized that I'm using 24 throughout to define the subnet mask. You can actually spell out the digits of the subnet mask if you know it offhand. So with 24, it translates to 255.255.255.0. So we can either use this or we use 24. It is, of course, easier just typing the 24. But for us to understand that we are achieving the same result, that is why I'm doing it this way for you to see. Stage 1. And then we define the preference. So the preference is 80. Then we hit enter. Now we are going to define the static route on router 3. So now if we call our IP routing table, maybe display IP routing table, this is what happens. So okay, so if we display the IP routing table, what do we see? We have succeeded in creating a static IP route on this particular interface too. So if I am on this particular router, or if I am on router 2, and then I say presets 10. So if I'm on router 2 and I say preset 10.0.3.3, it looks true, and then it picks. So we are able to see the results. Let's wait for what happens after using the trace route. So we should be able to see how the system calculates and then picks the nearest route, because it will realize that there is a route between router 2, router 1 and router 3. But if it is coming to pass through router 1 to router 3, obviously the time the information will be delivered would be late. Because if there is a connection between router 2 and router 3, why not pick that particular connection? So that is why we established the static route within these particular routers, such that if this particular link fails, we have a way to communicate through this particular one. And if this fails, we have a way to communicate through to the other router, because we always have a link through. So we will be able to pass through another router to communicate whilst we solve our problem on maybe the reason the link has failed. So do contact me for more videos, and then you can also ask questions if you don't understand any via the comments buttons there. Thank you for watching, and then I would expect you to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos. It is Godfred Yaka, the Unisky training platform. Thank you.